Hey everyone, Paul DiLuigi here with our Unit 2 video presentation. Today we're going to be talking about two different clinical cases that were assigned to us, so let's just dive right into the first case here. Now, the first case involves a 16-year-old female who was recently diagnosed with a deficiency of muscle glycogen phosphorylase disease. This is also known as McArdle's or GPD. And after meeting with this 16-year-old patient or family, they are concerned and have several questions which they would like to have answered. The first question which they asked was, how muscle glycogen is used during normal exercise. Now, as you may or may not know, glycogen is the storage form of glucose, which contains between 2,000 and 60,000 glucose residues. These stores are located within skeletal muscles, and they compose up to 80% of all glycogen stores in the body. The liver is the next largest source. Now, these stores provide skeletal muscles with a source, although a limited source of glucose. Now, this eliminates the body's need to consume extracellular or blood plasma glucose. More or less, they have a direct source located within muscle cells. Now, GPD affects the catalyzation of these glycogen stores, and this limits the amount of free glucose, which would, under normal conditions, meet the energy requirements for skeletal muscle contraction during exercise. Individuals with GPD typically struggle with exercise for the first minute to 5 minutes or 6 minutes or so. Then they experience a second wind phenomenon in which exercise becomes easier and they can last longer in their activities. Another question they were concerned with is, will she be able to take long walks with her friends? And this is absolutely not a problem for our young patient here. A physician-supervised exercise program will be critical, but this will also include long walks, or any kind of anaerobic-based exercise program. The nature of this program is necessary to allow her skeletal muscles the opportunity to metabolize other sources of energy. These other sources may be fatty acids, amino acids, or, as I previously mentioned, stores from the liver, glycogen stores from the liver. This will be another source of energy which she may utilize. Now, following these guidelines will limit some of the adverse effects that will be seen with anaerobic exercise. We don't want her respiring anaerobically. Now, the next question that the patient and the family had was, will she have to get up in the middle of the night and eat to maintain blood glucose levels? And she will not, as long as she is following a physician guided diet plan and her exercise regimen. She will not have to get up in the middle of the night to maintain her blood glucose levels. However, in order to metabolically optimize the available glucose and prevent adverse effects of GPD, her diet modifications should be made with the recommendation of a physician, and these strategies will limit the adverse effects that are seen with GPD. Now, a diet rich in carbohydrates, utilizing creatine supplements, and eating or drinking a prescribed amount of sucrose before exercise will be very beneficial. This will help her maintain her blood glucose levels, or at least keep them sufficient enough that she may utilize them for metabolism. And then the last question which the patient and family had was, will they need to worry about excessive lactate during anaerobic exercise? And she will have to worry about anaerobic exercise, but she will not have to worry about the lactate buildup, because intense anaerobic exercise will not produce excessive amounts of lactate. This is due to the cell's ability to utilize or oxidize the lactate at a higher rate than her cells can produce. It's been recently concluded by the scientific community that lactate is an important fuel source for muscle contraction especially for patients with GPD. This is because, again, the patient can utilize the lactate before it builds up in the cells. Now, the most concerning effect of the anaerobic exercise is going to be the acute renal failure, the myoglobinuria, exercise intolerance, fatigue, muscle cramps, pain, and rhabdomyolysis. So this patient will need to be aware and need to control her exercise as directed by her physician. Now, that concludes our first case. Let's move on to our second case, which involves a suspected case of glycogen storage disease, or GSD. This is in a previously healthy 2-month-old female. So, because we don't know the details, let's kind of dive in here and review this real quick. As I just mentioned, it's a 2-month-old female, previously healthy, coming down with jittery spells several hours after breastfeeding. The only food source this baby has had has been the breast milk. The baby is only sleeping for 2 hours or so. The mother reports that these symptoms start to occur after this time period. Laboratory results come back with low blood glucose. Epinephrine was administered, and there was no increase in blood glucose, but there was an increase in blood lactate. And the physical exam also reveals a enlarged liver. Now, before breaking down why we have a suspected case of GSD, let's look at some of the other causes or potential causes of this baby's troubles. One of the suspected diseases which may be affecting this child is hereditary fructose intolerance. This is a rare disease. It's autosomal, and there are actually several variants of the disease. Individuals affected with HFI are absent of the enzyme aldolase B. Now, aldolase B is responsible for the breakdown of fructose 1-phosphate, and that breaks down into glyceraldehyde and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Due to the liver's inability to metabolize fructose, a toxic buildup occurs and causes cellular death. The main signs and symptoms are nausea, bloating, diarrhea, vomiting, and hypoglycemia. Aside from the hypoglycemia, none of which the 2-month-old are experienced. And then another reason why it cannot be HFI is that there are only very low concentrations of fructose found in breast milk. And as we just reviewed, this was the baby's only source of nourishment. Another potential cause is galactosemia. This is another rare autosomal genetic disease, which involves galactose metabolism. Individuals with this disease are absent of the enzyme galactose 1-phosphate uridyl transferase, or GALT, and this is the enzyme which is responsible for galactose metabolism. Now, when galactose is insufficient, levels of galactose 1-phosphate and galactitol, they build up and they cause systemic dysfunction. Some of these signs and symptoms are loss of appetite, excessive vomiting, jaundice, diarrhea, irritability, wasting, and even death in some rare cases. Again, none of these signs and symptoms are aligning with our case or with our assessments of the 2-month-old infant, so we are going to eliminate that. Another suspected disease might be glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, or G6PD. Now, this is another potential cause of our infant's troubles. It's another metabolic disorder which contributes to the proper function of RBCs, or red blood cells. Deficiency is a cofactor in the dysfunction in hemolysis of RBCs. There are several other metabolic processes such as infectious disease, drugs, medications, and foods, which actually contribute to this type of hemolytic anemia. So in all, it's actually a cofactor in a bigger or larger scale disease. Most of these symptoms include fatigue, pale color, shortness of breath, tachycardia, jaundice, and splenomegaly. And again, a lot of these signs and symptoms are not aligning with our case. But what we do think it is glycogen storage disease, another rare inherited genetic condition in which the individual may be homozygous, recessive, or compound heterozygous for that disease, which is very interesting, especially given that it may be heterozygous, which, as we all know, does not produce two alleles on the same genome. So there are at least a dozen variants of GSD, and the most concerning effects of the disease include the inability to break down glucagon stores in the liver. The clinical signs and symptoms range with a wide variability. Some of the most common among the variants are, especially in infants, not growing fast enough, heat intolerance, bruising, swollen belly, hyperlipidemia, muscle cramping, pain, and then in the case of our 2-month-old infant, hypoglycemia, hepatomegaly, and lactic acidosis. Now, these last three clinical signs and symptoms our infant does have. So this leads me to suspect that we are dealing with a case of GSD. So I hope you like the presentation, and we will see you on the next one. Thank you.